All right, all right. Happy Friday. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the Savvy Sab Show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. Got a great show lined up. I hope you guys are pumped and ready for the weekend. I know I am. So I want to give a couple of shout outs to people in the chat first. Let's see who is here and what is going on. Shout out to Combat, says first one here. Woohoo! All right, Combat. What's going on, Lewis? Patriotic socialism is fascism. Yikes. Swift BMF. Oh, this is going to be so funny. I'm just going to be here for the Jackson in the live chat. I don't know what that means. I don't know what means, but okay. Shout out to Samuel. There's no Jackson in the live chat. This is debating Magacommunism with Danny and Ben Norton's perspective, just like how Jackson debated from his perspective. What's going on? Tashi says hi. Hello, Tashi. What's going on? Shout out to Bad Cookie, says good evening. Greetings, Matt Peterberg. What's so complicated about MAGA? What is left that isn't already known? We'll get into that, Matt. We're going to get there. Shout out to Kitty Loves Films. Glad we are going to be talking about this MAGA communism BS. It's creeping me out. Shout out to CC. What's MAGA communism? We're going to get into that. What's going on, Jennifer Lee? The U.S. has always been evil. It has never been great. So at their core, anyone saying MAGA is either ignorant, revisionist, or delusional. Yikes. Oh, the comments. What's going on, Rodrigo? Chris Hedges is right. Twitter is a waste of time. We should organize in person. Agreed, Rodrigo. Agreed. Shout out to Gannon D, says much love, Sabs. Much love to you too, Gannon. Shout out to Alan. Hello. What is going on, Tori? Always bringing the fire. Shout out to Leroy, says peace and solidarity. What's going on? PJ says hello. Love you. Love you. I don't know why I said love you twice. Sorry. Love you. Thank you for your wisdom. PJ, that's an interesting mask you got there. Shout out to Caleb. Like the stream. Hit that like button, guys. That helps us with the algorithm. What's going on? Frank says much love, Sabby. Much love, Frank. Shout out to Reggie Sylvester from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. What's up? Shout out to Bed-Stuy. What's going on? Joe OWS says hello, family. Greetings, Cape Socialist says hey, all. Shout out to Where Pilgrim says, hey, everybody. Greetings, Marks and Engels. Peace from Melbourne. Oh, we have Australia in the chat. Greetings. Okay. We're going to get into this because for those who are not aware, let me pull up my thumbnail first. Let's get into that. But for those who are not aware, there is a new term that is going around, and it's called Magacommunism. This has been, pushed by Jackson Hinkle. He's been on the show to talk about his opinions about patriotic socialism. He's talked with Nick and with CJ about that. And the idea, from what I've gathered from Magacommunism, is that we would work together with Trump supporters to get things done. Now, yeah, it's interesting because, listen, I'm all for organizing with people. To me, it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. If we're fighting for healthcare, if we're fighting for a living wage, those kind of things like that, I totally get that. I think the problem here, per se, is the fact that you're basically putting MAGA and communism together, and people who are MAGA supporters are not in favor of communism. So that's the problem. Again, I'm all for trying to work together with people to get things accomplished, but I think mixing the two there is not going to work out particularly well. So let me go ahead and share my thumbnail, and then we'll get into these discussions tonight. So here we go. Okay, so tonight I have two stories for you. We are going to discuss Danny Haiphong and Ben Norton MAGA communism, and we're going to be talking about Chuck Schumer drops a bombshell. Can't wait for that. I can't wait to get into that. So I'm actually going to start with the MAGA communism discussion. So when Jackson Hinkle was on RBN recently, there was an idea proposed that maybe Jackson, Ben Norton, and Danny Haiphong could have this debate about MAGA communism on RBN. That way it would be like a neutral spot. We know all of them. And that way it would be fair. But, you know, Jackson said that he would do that. He put out a tweet saying that he would do that. I did hear back from Danny Haiphong, who was also on board with doing that, but it looks like that is not going to happen. I don't want to get into too many details there, but just letting you know, that's where we're at right now. So Danny Haiphong and Ben Norton did have this discussion, though, and they had this discussion on the left lens. So I want to go ahead and bring up that clip because I want you to hear some of the things that are said here, because I think these are valid points. Again, I would have loved to seen this discussion with all three of them. But like I said, I did talk to Danny, and Danny did say that he was up for doing it, but it appears that Jackson is not going to do it. So I don't know what's up with that, but let's go ahead and get into this clip. So I'm going to go ahead and share here. And if you have not figured out by now, obviously, Danny and Ben are not in favor of MAGA communism, hence why there would have been a debate. So let's go ahead and get into this discussion.
Last topic on the order of the day for this conversation is this concept of MAGA communism. So I know that there have been Twitter exchanges, there have been, unfortunately, name calling, which I found to be just not in good taste. But let's talk about the idea, okay? Because, we both consider ourselves socialists, not socialists as in small d, democratic socialists, but socialists in the tradition of communism and Marxism. So I want to know your thoughts about this. And perhaps, let's just throw out maybe like a devil's advocate question. I addressed this last night on my stream. It isn't for me. I'll definitely comment what you have to say, but I don't need to open with a big introduction about my opinion on it. But let me just ask you a question. So a lot of the criticism against our position and in your position in particular is, well, you don't want to go to the working class whites. You don't want to appeal to them. You don't want to try to win them over to communism. What would you say, or you don't want to unite them, should we say, against the forces of globalism? I don't even want to use that term. Let's just say global capital for our sake. The deep state, you don't want to do that because you're not willing to engage with MAGA. What do you have to say to that?
I mean, it's ridiculous on so many levels. Just a few things. First of all, globalism doesn't exist. It's a right-wing buzzword. It's called imperialism and capitalism. And we have to have a scientific economic understanding of what imperialism is and how it operates. Globalism is a term that obscures that and tries to separate imperialism from capitalism. And if you try to do that, you can't understand what's actually happening. Second of all, the idea that I'm not interested in challenging the deep state is very funny and hilarious, because I, at Multipolarista, in fact, have a series with the leftist historian Aaron Good, Marxist influence historian, and it's called Empire and the Deep State. And it's a history of the US empire and the US deep state, from a materialist, socialist understanding to actually grasp at what the deep state is as the reflection of the US capitalist class, of large corporate oligarchs, of capitalist interests driving the interests of the US state and the US empire. If you try to separate capitalism and a materialist understanding from imperialism and the deep state, all you're going to do is end up getting weird right-wing racist conspiracies about Jews or the Illuminati or whatever like that. We need to have an actual understanding. Now, let's talk about this idea of so-called MAGA communism. It's ridiculous on so many levels.
Okay, I do just want to chime in here and just add that in reference to these conspiracy theories, he mentioned the Illuminati. I do want to add the Illuminati is not just a right-wing conspiracy theory. I will tell you that one. There are people that are not political at all that believe that. So I just want to add that in there. And I also want to point out the reference that he made about capitalism and imperialism and this term globalism. So CJ and Nick and Jackson did have this discussion about globalism as well on RBN. And I will have to agree with Ben here. You cannot separate imperialism from capitalism. They do go hand in hand. So I think that that is important to note. I think it seems like to me, there seems to be this need or drive to come up with a better type of capitalism, which I don't think is possible. I think that's been tried. I think capitalism is what it is. It allows for exploitation of workers. This is why you see a lot of workers going on strike the past like year and a half. So capitalism has not been working. So I, for one, am anti-capitalist. I don't believe there is like a better version of capitalism. I don't believe there's a softer side of capitalism. I don't believe it works because you cannot have capitalism without some type of exploitation of others. So let's go ahead and get back into the video.
First of all, we need to separate this whole idea of the so-called white working class from MAGA. First of all, the working class is not white. The working class has no race. The working class is international. There are white workers, but the white working class, it does not exist. There's no white working class. There is a working class, and there are white workers, and there are black workers, and Asian workers, but it is a working class, right? The idea of like going after the white working class, that's another form of identity politics. Why are you trying to appeal specifically to white people? You should appeal to workers on a working class basis. The idea that I don't know anything about like white workers is absurd. Like,
okay, let's chime in here for just a second in reference to the working class. So Ben is saying there's no such thing as a white working class. This is really interesting to hear. And I say this because there were actually commentators that criticized Bernie Sanders' 2020 run, and they said that he alienated the white working class. Kid you not. This is what was said, that they believe that the reason why he didn't win, and I mean, I think you know the reason why he didn't win. It was rigged, but the reason why that he did not win is because they felt his 2016 run actually connected more to the white working class, and his 2020 run did not connect so much with the white working class. Now, that came from commentators right here on Left Independent Media. So it's interesting to hear a different perspective. So Ben is letting you know there is no such thing as the white working class. He said it's just working class and there are different races of people. Some would argue, though, that Black people are the working class as well. So this is a different take on it. Again, I'm not here to, I guess, per se, like take a side per se. I'm just here to analyze this particular discussion.
My family's from Ohio, like from Cleveland, Ohio, which is a deindustrialized area. I went to school in Kentucky. Like, I know these parts of the United States quite well, right? Okay, MAGA is not a political movement. MAGA is not a movement. MAGA is a campaign slogan created by Donald Trump, quite literally, on a hat.
So the MAGA slogan stands for Make America Great Again. And I actually want to go back a little back in history and tell you that even Donald Trump didn't create that slogan. Ronald Reagan, this is as far back as I know, Ronald Reagan actually also had that slogan of Make America Great Again. So it wasn't a slogan that Donald Trump invented. I remember my mom specifically pointing out that Reagan had that slogan as well. So pass that on to people, because I think a lot of people are giving Donald Trump credit for that slogan. A lot of the things that you see today that's being done today, whether it's politically, musically, etc., a lot of these things have already been done. People are taking things that happened in the past and they are basically giving it new life today. Just keep that in mind.
A merchandising slogan used to run for election as U.S. president, which is the chief commander-in-chief of the U.S. empire, on behalf of the US capitalist class. There can never be anything progressive, yet alone revolutionary or anti-hegemonic or anti-systemic about MAGA. Quite literally, it is a campaign slogan linked at the umbilical cord to Donald Trump. When they say MAGA, they mean we support Donald Trump. You can't separate that from Donald Trump. He literally coined the term. He literally put it on his hats that he sold in his campaign site and used it to run for president. Okay, now let's talk about Donald Trump himself. The idea that all white workers in the United States support Donald Trump is preposterous. It is completely ridiculous. All right, in 2016, in the presidential election, there was 56% voter turnout. 56% voter turnout. That means 44% of eligible voters did not participate. That's not including the large numbers of people in the United States who have been disenfranchised, especially disproportionately Black people.
Want to add to this point here, the majority of the working class does not vote, and not necessarily because they don't want to. Some don't want to, but some can't, because again, election day in this country is not a holiday. So some people can't get the time off from work to vote. So that's part of the problem too. But he's right in the sense here that the majority of working class are not necessarily, or all working class are not necessarily Donald Trump supporters. That is very true. I think that, we can't talk about this without not mentioning the fact that the majority of Americans don't vote at all. So is MAGA a movement? I don't know.
Okay, 46% of the 56% turnout voted for Trump. That's 63 million people. That is 25% of adults in the United States voted for Donald Trump in 2016. In 2020, there was 67% voter turnout, so a little higher, and 47% voted for Trump. That's 28% of US adults. So in both elections, we're talking about just around 1/4 of people voted for Donald Trump. Okay, why are we not talking about the 44% of people who did not vote in the 2016 election? I think that that's a much more opportune base for people to recruit if you're looking to try to build socialism, to build a movement outside the two capitalist imperialist parties. Why are these opportunists only trying to go after people who support Donald Trump? Because it's not political for them. They don't actually believe this, I think, in many senses. This is strictly grifting.
Okay. I think he has a point about going after non-voters. I think that should be the focus. If you're trying to win electorally in this country, you have to target the people who usually do not come out and vote. I do agree with that. The grifting term, I don't know. I've heard grifting used so many different ways. I've heard grifting being applied to people because they went on to Tucker Carlson. I've heard grifting being used or applied to people because they have a Patreon. By the way, just about everybody that does this has a Patreon. I've heard grifting being used or being applied to people because they all of a sudden they become popular or their subscriber count starts to increase dramatically, and all of a sudden they're grifters per se. I don't know if I want to go on to call Jackson Hinkle a grifter. I really don't know what Jackson is doing, but I think that term has been thrown around in so many different ways, and I wish we could get to the point where we can stop calling each other names and just focus on the issues. And I've seen a lot of name calling around this particular situation on Twitter. I will say that.
It is opportunism. They're making money off of it. They recognize there's a large base of right-wingers who have a lot of money, because another part of this is that the people who voted for Donald Trump were not disproportionately working class. On the contrary, they were disproportionately upper middle class in wealthy suburbs. On average, they were more affluent than people who voted Democrat. Now, I'm not supporting voting Democrat. I've never voted Democrat. I have never supported voting Democrat. I have an established record of this going back much longer than these so-called MAGA communists, many of whom were Democrats quite literally 3 years ago.
Okay, let's talk about something here. People who were literally Democrats 3 years ago. I can see that as well. But I will also say that people do evolve. How many of us supported Bernie Sanders, 2 years ago when we were off that Bernie train? How many of us were Obama supporters and we got off that Obama train and left the Democratic Party? So I think there is room for people to evolve, and some people do evolve quicker or faster than others. I will say that. Another thing I do want to point out about working class voters that did support Donald Trump, we do have to remember that Donald Trump did capture the Rust Belt. Hillary Clinton did not. So those are places like a Youngstown, Ohio, or like a Cleveland, a Gary, Indiana, these towns that had a lot of factory jobs back in the day. And unfortunately, they were devastated by NAFTA, which was put in place by Bill Clinton. So I think that is one part that we do have to acknowledge. He was able to capture the Rust Belt, and that does include working class people. Just something to point out there.
Running for office on a mainstream liberal democratic platform, literally in 2019. Okay? So why are we not talking about the tens of millions or potentially over 100 million people in the United States, working class people who are disenfranchised, who don't believe in the political process, who recognize correctly that both ruling class capitalist imperialist parties do not serve their working class interests? Why are people instead doing a reverse lesser evilism? And this, to me, Danny, is incredible, because what they're doing is exactly what the social democrats were doing in the past 10 years, is to say we have to vote Democrat because they're lesser evil. All these so-called MAGA communists, who are not communists in any way, according to any consistent definition of the term, they're not even socialists. These people are doing the exact opposite. They're doing a reverse lesser evilism. They're saying that we should recruit among Republicans. We should basically cater our politics to the Republican Party and say that the Republicans are lesser evil, and tell people quite literally to vote for Donald Trump. That's what these so-called MAGA communists are doing, literally.
And that I don't agree with. I don't think the Republican Party is the better option. I don't think either one of these parties is the better option. If anything, you should be leaving the duopoly altogether. So I agree with Ben about that. Like, I think that's ridiculous. I'm not going down that road. And I think we need to ask ourselves why. Why would people want to promote that if you know that both parties are corporate, if you know that both parties support corporate interest and not the people? Why would you want to push people towards the other party that is still having corporate interest best at hand? Why would you want to do that? So no, this whole idea of MAGA communism, I don't agree with that. I don't think MAGA supporters or Trump supporters would embrace communism. They would not. If anything, we would have to change our policies. We would have to change our positions and come on board with theirs. They're not going to change their views and their position and come on board with us. That's not going to happen. So what exactly are they trying to accomplish here with this idea of MAGA communists? I just don't think it would work.
They're saying vote for Donald Trump. This is the exact polar inversion of the pro-imperialist liberals like Vosh, who say vote for the Democrats every year, vote for Joe Biden. They're the polar inversion of each other. Ironically, they're both patriotic so-called socialists who wag the genocidal U.S. flag and talk about how great the U.S. is. They're quite literally polar inversions of each other. That's why I've mostly avoided this. It's a distraction. They're not serious. They're not socialists. They're certainly not communists. What they're trying to do is redefine communism and redefine socialism to say that actually we're conservatives, but we're also communists.
And I don't think those terms should be redefined. I think those terms are good the way that they are. So, I have, there are some things that I do have disagreements with Ben Norton about when it comes to the pandemic. I have disagreements with him about that. There's things I don't agree with Danny Haiphong about. But when it comes to this issue of MAGA communism, this is not something that I would be on board for. Not at all. Let's go back in.
What are you talking about? They're actually just redefining communism. They certainly have no theoretical understanding of Marxism and Leninism. Give me a break. They're redefining even socialism to make it the same as conservatism and say, oh, we're just conservatives. And of course, at the end of the day, they're profiting from it. These people are profoundly unserious. They're not a member of a party. They're not a member of an organization. They don't believe in collective action. They believe in their own personal brands to make money, to sell gold, quite literally, to do ads to sell gold alongside Steve Bannon and Ron Paul for this company called Birch Gold.
Okay. I don't know who's selling gold, but so this is new to me. I didn't know about any gold being sold. If you guys know, tell me in the chat. Let me know. But Steve Bannon is cringe, in my opinion, is absolutely cringe. But to be fair, I mean, there are some, what is that, Matt? Hinkle is selling gold. LOL. He is? Really? Okay, that's interesting. I will say this. I do know that Jackson Hinkle, we reported this, I think it was like maybe a month or two ago, that his channel was demonetized on YouTube. So he did put out there to people, please support him on Patreon and locals, so that he would not have to take sponsorships. But eventually, I guess it got to the point where he had to take sponsorships, and he did announce that he will be taking a sponsorship. But gold, that's interesting, because I didn't think I thought gold was on its way out, like, to be honest with you, but I don't know. Greg Bruce says gold is just something some people like to invest in. Who the F cares? Yeah, I don't know. That's right, MJC. After Jackson was demonetized, he was forced to accept sponsors in order to fund his channel. That's right. I remember him saying that. So I think it's important to mention that part. I get where Ben is coming from, but I think it is important to at least mention that.
This is not a project for political transformation, and it's profoundly unserious. And that's why before and after, I have refused to engage with them. Today, I wanted to engage with this ridiculous concept, but after this, I'm just going to ignore it because it's all grifting. It's not a serious political tendency.
And even if, in my opinion, right, like, for me, we can obviously see, and I think a lot of what you brought up is that it is totally reasonable to assume, right, especially with some of the actions, and especially the name calling, and then all of the ways that this has been approached, right, can definitely get the sense that this is not serious. But even if we were to concede, right, that, all right, grifting, this or that, whatever, like, we can concede.
I'm sorry. What's this, Jared? Ben Norton steals donations from Gray Zone and accepts money from YouTube advertisements. Okay. That is interesting. That's interesting. I thought Ben Norton was a part of Gray Zone. I'm confused. I don't know. Maybe you guys can explain more to me in the chat.
Let's just take that, shelve that. When we even just look at the idea, however, right, the idea of this, I think the most poignant point that you made, and that I wholeheartedly agree with, is that there's no reflection upon what this means strategically, right? Because on the one hand, if you are a working class white person who lives in a Trump-dominated area, right, and you're trying to organize them in some kind of way, this is just an abstract thing, you're trying to organize them some kind of way toward socialism, then if that's your strategy and you're just doing a poor job by saying we're going to do MAGA communism and that's the strategy, then I think I would be a little more forgiving and even just more open about this as a trend. But that doesn't, that's just not what it is, because there's this big kind of elephant in the room of, well, you have the majority of young working class people already thinking about socialism. You have the material conditions where you have most people in the United States either holding their nose for either party or not voting at all because, as you said, they're disenfranchised, or they're just not voting. So you have this massive base of people who are willing to talk about alternatives, third parties, socialism. And we're focusing on a very small subsection where only a small subsection of that MAGA camp, if we can even call it a MAGA camp, people don't vote for Donald Trump or anybody really underneath MAGA all the time. People swaying back and forth. If you want to focus on the entire working class, then why is it that there's so much of the working class that's being ignored? And with this framing, it inherently alienates a large subsection of that working class. For me,
Okay, that's a good point. I mean, if you are talking about MAGA per se, obviously that doesn't include some people or some groups, right? Yes, there are Black people that have supported Donald Trump and do support MAGA, but not that many. Not that many. just keeping it real there. So yeah, some people would be, I guess, alienated from that. So that's a good point that Danny brought up. I want to highlight something here that someone said to me. Base God Flashy, Sabby Birchgold is associated with all right-wing grifters. Steve Bannon, Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, etc. Okay, thank you for letting me know that. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. Yeah, Sabby don't like that. Sabby don't like Tenzin. Sabby Sabs, I think you mean True. Jackson has said that he stole gray zone money after leaving the gray zone. Interesting. Has anyone addressed that? I'm just curious, has anyone from the gray zone addressed that? That's interesting. Yikes. That's scary. Thank you for the super chat, Meteor Dream. Sabby, you would have an easier time organizing cats than this MAGA commie BS. And Sabby, Hinkle has gone full mask off as of lately. It's so cringe, to be honest. Wow. I think I'm always late to this kind of like these beefs and spats and stuff like that, especially if it's on Twitter. I'm usually late to that kind of stuff because I usually just post on Twitter and I'll hop off, to be honest. But yeah, this is interesting. Let's go back in because they make some more points here as well.
my big problem is you are seeding everyone who is, you could call them under the Democratic Party camp, or for maybe fun terms, right? America was already great camp, because that's how the Democratic Party views the MAGA camp, right? It's MAGA. What are you talking about? America's already great. That's what Hillary Clinton said. That's what Obama, all these neoliberals said. So you're conceding everyone who may be in that camp, but is very disillusioned by it, disaffected, and thinking about socialism, they're organizing labor unions in places that have never been organized before. They're thinking about socialism seriously. Why are we? What is, for me? What is the interest in going for MAGA? Right? What for me? It doesn't make any sense in that way. It's not good strategy. No one is saying ignore everybody who voted for Trump. Certainly, if people are open and willing to hear things and change their opinion, then of course we should talk to them. But at the same time, that's another abstract scenario. We're talking about the reality of the situation, of this being targeting maybe a very active online segment of the population, but very marginal section of the population in terms of the actual existing conditions of the United States. And we're not even talking about the rest of the world.
Okay, this is a good question, or a good point that Danny made here. I think the thing is, too, if you are trying to appeal to MAGA supporters, if you're trying to take socialists and combine them with MAGA supporters, I think it's important to note at the end of the day, the MAGA supporters are still going to support the Republican candidate. So if Donald Trump were to run again, Ron DeSantis were to run, whoever they decide to put forth, when it comes to that, they are still going to support the Republican candidate. They're going to support the right. They're not going to flip and say, okay, we're going to support third party and independent candidates. That's not going to happen. Not for the people who are in deep like that. Some people are in so deep with that there's no turning back. And I know people like that. So I think you have to ask, what exactly is the strategy? Danny brought up a good point. What is the strategy? Is it getting together with them to fight for things outside of electoral politics in terms of like marches, direct action, to get them to do activism, to push the politicians to pass some of these types of legislation? Is that the strategy? Or is the strategy to get them to not support? Because if the strategy is to get them to not support Republican candidates, to not support Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, and to bring them over to third party or independent, because they're not going to go Democrat, to bring them over third party and independent, I don't think that that may work. So what exactly is the strategy? That's a good question.
Yeah. So the argument that these so-called MAGA communists, who are the same as the patriotic socialists, I mean, it's the same people, and it's the same argument. And of course, the so-called patriotic socialists have a lot in common with the so-called national socialists, especially considering neither is socialist. We'll talk about that in a second. I mean, there's a significant fascist undercurrent here that we need to understand theoretically, but we'll get to that in a second. First of all, let's talk about this idea that if you oppose MAGA, you oppose white people or something, which is just insane white identity politics. These people criticize so-called identity politics. They're promoting white identity politics. The reality is that people, working class white people in the United States, have a variety of views. Some vote for Republicans, some vote for Democrats. The majority don't vote. And again, we need to look at the actual class position of many of the people who voted for Trump.
That's right. The majority don't vote. That is important to mention. Those are the people, I say again, you need to go after the non-voters, not the people who are already basically assigned to a political party.
They were disproportionately petty bourgeois, so-called upper middle class, wealthy people in the suburbs, especially, you know, what Trump called the boat, what do you call them? The boat owners or whatever. His great boat people in Florida, referring to like all of these people living in these gated communities in Florida who are the small business owners who exploit multiple employees and have like boats or whatever. The beautiful boat people is what he called them, I think. So we're not talking about working class people. We're talking about petty bourgeois. Honestly, if you want to look at the class conflict between the Republicans and the Democrats, it is largely a conflict between the national bourgeoisie elements in the United States and financial bourgeois. And obviously, both are enemies of socialism, especially in the context of an empire. Trump's base are largely those national bourgeois construction elements, petty bourgeois elements. And then, of course, behind the Democrats, you have financial capital, you have Silicon Valley. Both parties are thoroughly capitalist, neoliberal, imperialist parties. And Trump himself governed as a complete neoliberal and as a complete imperialist.
That's important. Okay, let's talk about that for just a second. Both parties are technically neoliberal and they're imperialist, and both parties are, I don't know if you said this, but I'll add this as well. Both parties are pro-war. Here's the problem. If you are the communist side of this MAGA communist, as a socialist, you are anti-imperialist. You are anti-war, correct? So again, when it comes to those issues, they're not with you. The party is not with you. So again, what exactly, I don't know what is going to happen with this. I really don't. I mean, I just don't, I don't see how that could work. I really don't. And I'm sorry, you guys. And listen, I'm all for, again, uniting with people to fight for healthcare, uniting with people to fight for a living wage and things like that. But I think as soon as you mention the word communism, most people are not going to be on board for that. Most people that I know that have supported Donald Trump and still support Donald Trump and say that they are MAGA, most people I know in that particular situation are not going to be on board when they see that word communism. Something to think about.
Not only did he wage an economic war in Venezuela, killing thousands of Venezuelans with illegal murderous sanctions and overseeing a right-wing coup attempt. Not only did he oversee the far-right coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia, not only did he kill Qasem Soleimani, the top Iranian general, and basically try to start a war with Iran while expanding sanctions on Iran. Not only did he expand the sanctions on Cuba and try to destroy Cuba, not only did he expand the war on Yemen, not only did he not refuse to end the war in Afghanistan that he claimed he was going to do, not only did he boast about occupying militarily the oil-rich regions and wheat-rich regions of Syria and boast that we're taking their oil, not only did Trump recognize Jerusalem, occupy Jerusalem as the fake capital of apartheid Israel and provide even more support for apartheid Israel, not only did Trump continue expanding the US empire in all of those ways, furthermore, Trump oversaw the largest wealth transfer from working class to capitalist class in modern history with these tax breaks for the rich. There's in no way can you call Trump a pro-working class president, or MAGA, which is not a movement. Again, it's a campaign slogan. It is in no way pro-working class. If you talk to a lot of poor white workers, as I've done in Appalachia, again, I went to school, high school and college in Kentucky. I've been to rural Appalachia, to areas that were devastated by mountaintop removal, by surface mining. I have family members who had factory jobs in Cleveland, Ohio, and they lost their jobs. They had good union jobs, and they lost their jobs through offshoring. It's not like I've never talked to working class white people. Like it's absurd. Like a lot of them don't believe in politics. They always say that the U.S. political system is corrupt. It's hopelessly corrupt. It can't be changed. It doesn't matter who you vote for because nothing will change. I have family members, a lot of family members in Ohio who voted for Trump. And a lot of them ended up saying, well, actually, Trump ended up not really changing anything. So these opportunists who are not communists, talking about so-called MAGA communism, they're simply grifters. They're trying to appeal to a right-wing base to make money. And what we should talk about, Danny, is they're more than willing to throw Black people under the bus, indigenous nations under the bus, Latinos under the bus, and especially LGBTQ people under the bus. We see them saying blatantly anti-trans, blatantly homophobic things. Like trans people are some of the most marginalized, oppressed people in the United States. The Democratic Party, for opportunistic reasons, has pretended to kind of care about trans people, although it's done nothing to actually help them. So these opportunists say, oh, the ruling class supports trans people, therefore we should throw trans people under the bus. These are the most marginalized people in society. Why are you demonizing them? They're just scapegoating poor, marginalized, oppressed people to build their followings. That's the definition of opportunism. There's nothing progressive or left-wing and certainly revolutionary or socialist about that.
Just want to chime in here for a second. I think we need to be careful. Look, I despise the Democratic Party. I despise the Republican Party. I vent about the Democratic Party more because a lot of people still haven't woken up to the fact that the Democrats are just as corrupt as the Republicans are. But I will say this. I think we need to be careful about or getting to the point where we start using the same talking points in reference to different groups the same way the Republican Party does. I think we need to be careful about some of these comments that I've seen made, and I've seen some of them, some of these comments that are being made about people who are LGBTQ, some of these comments that are being made about women. I think we need to be careful. You can get your point across about how corrupt the Democratic Party is. You can talk about the politicians. You can talk about their donors. You can talk about how they don't actually really help the people. They help corporate interests. You can cover all of that and you can show people the data that proves that. I've shown people this multiple times. I've gone right on to Open Secrets. I've shown you guys receipts and show you exactly where the money is coming from and where the money's going. You can do all of that and educate people without going as far as to start criticizing or start attacking other groups of people. Because then once you start doing that, and I've seen this happening, once you start saying some of these same things about the LGBTQ community or about trans people or about immigrants, You're saying the same things that the Republican Party is saying. Once you start doing that, then people, and this is where I think Ben is getting this from, then people are going to kind of look at you like, okay, what exactly are you doing? What exactly is going on? So I think you have to be careful. I think you got to be careful with that. This is a really long interview. Check it out, you guys. I can't play the entire video on here, but this is on Danny Haiphong's channel. And the name of this video is called, let me pull out here so you can see. The name of the video is called Live Ukraine, Multipolarity, and Magacommunism with Ben Norton. And I believe this video, the date is September 15th. So this was posted yesterday. Definitely go check it out on Danny's channel, The Left Lens, if you want to see the full segment. It's a long, I mean, this is about a 2-hour stream on Danny's channel. So definitely check that out so you can see all of it. But I have to say, I'm not on board with MAGA communism, period. And I know Jackson and I know Danny, I know of Ben, but I'm not on board with that, period. Let's go to some of the comments here. Rodrigo says, Bill Clinton also used MAGA. That's right. Thank you for the reminder, Rodrigo. I thought I did that one already. Franken Kitten said Lee Camp, Combo Couch, Graham Elwood, and others are demonetized and don't take sponsors. That's a good point, Franken Kitten. I don't know everybody's financial situation, but that's a good point. And thank you for the super chat, Cryosynth. Ben left the gray zone and repurposed the moderate Rebels channel for Multipolarista with the established subs. Max won't talk about it when approached, gets visibly upset. Mod rep was given back. Okay. Well, I'll just say it seems like apparently that was not supposed to be a public issue. So there's some personal issues here too. I've seen some of the name calling, and like I said, you can get your point across without doing all that. So I think there are some personal issues too. For those of you who came in later, I did hear from Danny Haiphong. He did reach out to Jackson for a debate about this particular issue. And as of before I went live, Danny has confirmed with me that Jackson has decided not to do that. So there you have it. It would have been great to have all three of them have this discussion, and we offered to do it right here on RBN, so they could kind of hash this out, and there wouldn't be the back and forth on Twitter and that kind of thing. But doesn't look like that's going to happen. So that's that. All right, I have one more story for you, and this is actually in reference to the midterms. Now, this is interesting because about a month ago, other Democrat politicians in Congress were saying that they are actually on board to win pretty big in November to keep the House and the Senate. A couple of them have said that, especially after Joe Biden has implemented this student loan cancellation of $10,000 to $20,000, right? But recently, someone decided to let the cat out of the bag. And that someone is Chuck Schumer. And Chuck is saying something a little bit different than what the other politicians in DC are saying. I want to give a quick shout out here to Case Study QB because he got this clip. Listen to this, because this is going to be different than what you have heard from the rest of the politicians the past month or so.
Because the Democrat Party had a...
Yeah, despite Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent public optimism about keeping the majority, Senator Chuck Schumer is reportedly singing a different tune. The report from Punchbowl News says that Schumer privately told Democrats if the election were held today, there was a 60% chance they would hold the Senate and a 40% chance they would hold the House, adding that Pelosi's position...
Okay, let's look at this for a second. Chuck Schumer said Democrats are going to lose the House. And like I said, this is different than what has been reported the past month or so. If the election were held today, there was a 60% chance we would hold the Senate and a 40% chance we would hold the House. Trump would run for election in 2024. Again, this is coming from Chuck Schumer. So let's go on.
As House Speaker could also be in trouble. He also believes Trump will run in 2024. This pessimistic message comes as people say President Biden has struggled to unite the nation.
The country was already divided to an extent. Biden didn't really help.
He's kind of playing off more of a puppet than a leader. I think he's trying to be a unifier. I just think it's really rough right now.
Just everything he's doing is like totally the wrong thing.
The GOP is also seeing an increase in its share of Latino voters. Columbia PhD student Daniel DiMartino spoke earlier in the show about the disconnect that some Latino voters feel with the modern Democratic Party.
I think it's happening because the Democrat Party has radicalized on social issues and it has failed to deliver on all the economic issues that Hispanics care about, right? We have the highest inflation in 40 years, which is hitting our pockets. And many of us, like, from people from Venezuela and even other Latin American countries experience hyperinflation, and we don't want to see that again here.
Okay, so a recent Fox News poll shows Americans believe the Biden administration is incompetent and not effective.
I have to pause it here at this poll. This is completely different than the poll that CNN put out yesterday on Twitter. Do you think the administration has been competent and effective? 52% said no, it hasn't. 38% said yes, it has. 11% don't know. And keep in mind here, it says here at the bottom, 1,201 registered voters between September 9 and 12. So just keep in mind, this poll is for people who are already registered to vote. That's usually how it works. But I will say this is different. These numbers are different. And Where Pilgrim, you just said it best. Let me see if I can find your comment really quick. But I thought everything was coming up roses for the Democrats. LOL. This is exactly what they were saying. They've been saying this on CNN, MSNBC, all of the liberal outlets, of course. They were saying that, yeah, we're on track to win. We're on track to win the House. We're on track to win the Senate. And now one of their own, Chuck Schumer, is saying, nah. The cat is out of the bag. I thought, wait a minute, guys. I thought the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade was supposed to be a shoo-in for the Democrats in the midterms. Remember that? That's what they were saying. Interesting.
With 52% not having faith in the administration. And a main factor was inflation fears, with 78% of Americans, many saying inflation is causing financial hardship. In a separate poll,
and the clip ends there. But I thought that was pretty. Let me turn the volume down here because I want to show you something else. I thought that this is just pretty revealing. And I do want you to hear their statements again, what voters were saying. Now, keep in mind, it is Fox News, so there is going to be some bias, just like if it was on CNN. But listen to what the voters had to say.
But except Biden didn't really help.
He's kind of playing off more of a puppet than a leader. I think he's trying to be a unifier. I just think it's really rough right now.
Just everything he's doing is like totally the wrong thing.
The woman who said he's a puppet. And the other gentleman said everything that he's doing is just totally the wrong thing. Oh dear. I want to go to some of the comments here. Let's see. This is hilarious to me. Hilarious. Chuck E. Cheese. The problem with Roe v. Wade is it doesn't split on even lines like a lot of other issues. More women are anti-abortion and more men are pro-abortion than women, and the parties are split the opposite. Ooh, interesting, Chuck. Interesting. Well, I was saying the same thing about student loan debt. They were like, oh, we're going to have all these young voters come out and show up in the midterms. And I had to debunk that because historically and typically, younger voters don't show up for the midterms. They show up for the presidential election. And even with the presidential election, we don't show up in the numbers that obviously people who are 65 and older do. So that's important to note. Just because he canceled 10 to 20,000 student loan debt, that doesn't mean that all of these young people are going to come rush the polls for the midterms. Typically, we don't show up to that. That's not my opinion. That's the fact. Typically, we don't. And you see Chuck Schumer telling you, yeah, we're probably going to lose. Chuck is like, let me put a stamp in that. We are probably going to lose. Bad Cookie said young folks don't pay attention to local politics. Exactly. Like most people that do vote only vote in the presidential election. Wesley said not everyone knows there is an election every 2 years. That's true. Exactly. Not everyone's paying attention. So I don't know. Did they, I'm going to see this. I'm going to wait and see. If Democrats lose in the midterms, which I still think they're going to, if they win, Roe v. Wade could have some impact on that. But if they lose in the midterms, that's going to be interesting because that's going to show them that not everybody had that desire to come out and support you because Roe v. Wade was overturned. In fact, some people are blaming you because you had decades to make this right. You could have codified Roe v. Wade in law years ago. You could have ended the filibuster under Barack Obama, and they did not do it. You had many decades, probably about 50 decades, 5 decades, 50 decades, 5 decades to get this right. And you sat on your ass and you let them come in and just overturn it. So people are angry. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We will see if people will come out in the way that they think. Did you send a super chat left? I don't see one from you. Let me make sure I didn't miss it. No, I don't see one from you. Brenda Sabby, as a former Jackson Hinkle supporter, I have to say that you and RBN should get as far away from him as possible. The guy is the definition of a grifter. Wow. Oh, I did miss it. Here it is. Thanks for the super chat, Laugh 66. Ben is incorrect to say trans people are the most marginalized people in society. The most marginalized people in society are poor people. You might have to have a talk with Ben, Laugh 66. You should talk to Ben about that. Try to get one more comment. I'll have to head out in a second, but I just wanted to make sure I got everybody here. Bryce, 50 decades sounds about right. Try. Hey, this is what happens when you're live sometimes, right? President Jesus, so Jackson won't debate Danny. So according to the message that I received, the answer was no. According to the message that I received. So I can only comment on what I have. Yes. Lynn Stacks, bodily autonomy should not be left to gerrymandered states to decide. Well, I think we're seeing the effects of all of this, right? Of the overturn and everything. But guys, that is my time. If you do want to see more Sabby, I'll be on my channel in about an hour. Comrade Misty is going to be joining me. She has a huge event coming up, a really important event that you need to know about, especially if you're in the DC area. She's going to come on and talk about that, and we'll have news. But other than that, guys, it is Friday. Have a good weekend. See you guys later. You know how it is. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.